All right. May 28th, Cartography Sync, I think. So far, it's just me and Marco hanging out. So if anything, this is going to be like almost like a cartography podcast then, huh?
Almost, yes.
Yeah, we have, you only need two speakers. This meeting is probably going to go pretty short. We don't really have that much to talk about, but we'll go through the stuff and then see what else we have. So just going through the normal items, stuff we did this past month. Marco, you added this feature to add in AWS account auto discovery. Thank you for that.
No worries.
Using well, here's Andrew. Let him get it in. You're late. And you're muted. Oh, there you go.
Sorry about that.
Good morning.
Computer setup and all that.
Yeah, me and Mark were just saying that we were starting a podcast.
Oh, nice. Go for it.
Yep. But yeah, Marco added the feature to do AWS account auto discovery on using the organization's API. And I think there's maybe like a step 2 that we can talk about later on, in case you're interested, which is a little bit more involved with modifying the Bodo core session and all that. Yeah. And then, of course, the second item that happened this past month was, Andrew, you built the amazing mapping IAM policies to actions on assets. I still need to help you out on finishing up that blog post. Sorry, I'm doing my best.
No worries. Take your time.
And then Con fixed some problems with Okta config access where we were I think we were throwing an actual error or something when we didn't necessarily need to be throwing an error if you didn't have it set up. And of course, we have our absolutely amazing logos now. So yeah, that's the stuff that happened in the past month. And then one thing I kind of want to bring up shortly is on this topic of fixing bugs related to like Okta config. Right now, the way cartography works is that you can't really configure what modules you want to run. It kind of just runs everything unless you comment out one of those modules in sync.py. And so, or either that, or so typically, like if you don't have Okta set up, if you don't have GCP set up, then it will actually run the sync, and then it'll like run into the Okta module, and then it'll say, is Okta configured? If not, all right, just skip, keep going. One thing that might be helpful is to provide the user the ability to just turn off that altogether. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Could be a good option, because one way to do it is via the custom sync, where you can specify which modules you want to run. That's already one option.
That's true. That's true. Hey, Sasha. So do you think that we need to, yeah, you're right. You can run the custom sync yourself. Do you think that there's a need, do you think that there would be benefits to specifying that in a config somewhere, or do we expect users to do that code change for a custom sync?
It could be less friction for people to set a config rather than creating a custom sync. That could be a good nice to have. Not a blocker, I think, because you still have the other option, but probably a good thing to have.
Yeah. Feature nice to have, I guess, configurable syncs don't require a code change. So I'll make an issue and then just kind of put a help wanted tag. It's not something that I can personally work on, but I think it's a fairly straightforward fix. I don't know. So I'll just put it out there. I think that it's a nice to have, like you said. All right, going down the list again, finishing up. We got two things that are work in progress. As far as work in progress goes, let's see. Hi there, Bernard.
How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good. I work with Sasha, so he just sent the invite, and here I am.
Awesome. Good to meet you. Well, I think we got Maxim joining in also.
I got kids over here, so I'll be on mute. But thanks for the invite.
Yeah, Bernard works on our threat intelligence function, and Maxim is on the security intelligence. Maxim is quite heavily involved in cartography at Amazon right now.
Yeah, cool.
Dealing with
Yeah,
scale problems.
I think we chatted last time also. But yeah, as far as the work in progress items, I think that the thing that we were working on previously was with DAGs. And Marco, I don't know if you took a look or had a chance to play with it before, but when I worked on this PR to go and implement DAGs and do a custom sync. The tricky part, so this DAG sync, the library that we're using, the thing that we built, is based off of something called Mara. And Mara sees itself as sort of a lightweight version of Apache Airflow, where it's not as heavyweight or involved as needing to do all those things. And in my own testing, if you put like trivial functions in there, if you put in like little placeholders, yeah, the DAG works. You can make something that has dependencies and all that stuff. Just that when you run it with a real cartography sync, there's certain conditions that result in a deadlock, and yeah, and so it's a little bit messy. And I guess like the one thing that I want to bring up here is we talked about this a little bit offline, but then what is the unit of parallelism that we want to care about, right? Like, do we want to run multiple accounts in parallel, or do we want to run multiple sub items in an account in parallel? So you have account A and account B syncing at the same time, or do you want within account A, do you want S3 to be syncing at the same time as EC2 since they have no data dependencies together?
So personally, I think that even having splitting by account could be useful because smaller accounts can terminate before the others, and we don't have to wait for the whole sync of all the assets to complete. That's my point of view, especially from my use case. Splitting by account could be a good way to start, unless Alex or Sasha, you have other ideas on this.
Yeah, one thing that I was...
Is the DAG approach aiming at just AWS, or like what are you trying to achieve with that?
The DAG approach is aiming at everything. The idea there is to take all of the stuff to most effectively hit all of our data dependencies so that everything runs in the most efficient way possible. If you can parallelize it, and make it so that if, for example, the AWS sync crashes, then that means that there's no reason why the GCP sync can't start.
And AWS and GCP could run together, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I guess like what we're asking here is like, what is the unit? What is the smallest unit that we should care about?
Could it be just simply the Intel module itself?
It could be the Intel module itself, which is the way it's currently built. But because having building the DAG is a relatively involved change, it needs to, before we make any real change right now, it's good to kind of iron this out beforehand.
Or could it be, so when I met Intel module, I think I met the sub modules as well, going down to the, like, for example, in AWS, S3, EC2, the individual components, same thing with Okta and GCP and so on.
Correct.
Right? So you can say, okay, run these things in parallel.
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about.
I see some challenges with the cleanup job potentially. I don't know how that would work.
Yeah. Yeah, with cleanup jobs, like one of the principles that we've tried to stay with is if a module sets something, that module should also clean it up. Kind of like cleaning up the stack, if you will.
Do you anticipate? I'm not familiar with it. The API throttling. So it might be per service. The rules might be per service. But for example, if we take AWS, if I know some concerns on our end, and I remember having some issues with that at Lyft, is if you start bombarding the AWS APIs, you're going to start getting throttle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So by having, and I don't know if it's the API call per account or API call coming from the same client, is we might put ourselves in a position where we're completely bombarding the APIs,
right?
And then we end up with having nothing finished,
right?
Meaning they crash at some point and they were kind of mid-state.
Correct. Yeah. So if we had S3 and EC2 running at the same time, for example, there could be a risk of throttling.
Or hypothetically, is you're prioritizing S3 buckets, and therefore you're doing all your S3 buckets accounts at the same time, and then debugging exactly, what is the state of S3 buckets accounts. Oh, sorry. What is the state of the sync of S3 for a given account might be non-trivial to figure out, right? Which means you throw away the entire sync because you don't know exactly where you're at. So meaning one account is complete, the other account, or one account is at 90% complete, the other account is at 10% complete. What do you do?
Right. Yeah, you run into this. We don't. Cartography is definitely not ACID compliant, right? There's nothing to ensure. If you have a partial sync, you have no idea if it's. It's very best effort in that sense.
Hey, sorry, I've been a little bit late. I actually was thinking about that, and the architecture in my mind that I had, because currently what I'm trying to understand, what actually can be run, in full isolation, where there is no any dependency between each component. The idea that I had about how we can bypass a little bit throttling and so on is actually to use a queue, of tasks, for example, S3 Intel module like EC2 and so on. And actually, we can use different lambdas, spin up different lambdas that can consume this queue and do this stuff in parallel. And actually, it will reduce chance that our calls to APIs will be throttled. And also as well, queues will give you by default functionality of the retries. You have this dead letter queue if something actually failed. After you can automatically retry it before, for example, you will do some other things that will require, cover lots of dependencies at the same time. And I don't know if for example, you have a list already of some isolated components, I can try to run it just to do some testing and tell you what's how it's in that. But currently, I think this architecture can help us rather than running it on the same instance inside one Python monolith, which will actually increase chance of failures and so on. We can actually distribute it a little bit using if you're using AWS normally to run cartography, it will be easy to distribute it across different lambdas. And also later you can think about glue catalog and so on, just automate all of these jobs that you should run for a sync. But currently the problem is I need to spend more time to understand what actually can run in isolation, just on what I was working a little bit and was thinking.
I see the two sort of approach could potentially be done, jointly. Is I'm cautious of taking a dependency on AWS Lambda as part of Neo4j, period, right? So Neo4j, not Neo4j, but cartography. That being said, the extensibility should be there, and when you start dealing with large, scaling issues, which we are already, I think it starts making sense. Maybe that from a DAG perspective, once you actually define that, then we can potentially write an extension that says, okay, here's how to process it in a distributed way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot. Yeah, I understand. There's
Yeah.
a number of different options that we can take it. Maxim, one question: what did you envision as the unit in a queue? Like, what is each object?
Like I was thinking on parallelizing it even on a different level, but for each unit in a queue, it would be actually specific AWS asset, like S3 or EC2 and so on.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because I'm worrying if we will start hitting it at the same time for multiple accounts, in specific regions, we still can get some throttling, because it might be per AWS account, not for a specific, for example, per specific private IP or public IP and so on. It can be like per account, or it can match actually different, footprints in, in the traffic. I don't know completely how AWS throttling works, but I'm sure that they have like some like good intelligent mechanism. It's not just per IP address or some setup. Another thing that it would require lots of architecture, re-architecture, and so on. But I had a vision actually. If you don't want to be dependent on AWS, like I think you're familiar with the Spark framework. It's like data analysis framework. It's actually also supports distributed graph infrastructure, and also it integrates with graph databases quite easily. The same with Spark frameworks, that you have workers that actually can do some work in parallel that is not dependent, for example, to the workers' data to each other. And after you can apply actually functions that can make an analysis of the full data sets that are distributed across all of the workers, which is quite time consuming, but it can complete as a first step some parallel tasks, and after can make an analysis, of the full data sets that are distributed across workers.
Another way to keep it cloud provider agnostic is to use Docker containers instead of like Lambda functions. So I know that GCP and AWS both have ways to run Docker containers automatically and run whatever code is in there, and that scales horizontally pretty well, similar to how a Lambda function would scale. And because it's not tied to a single cloud provider, it doesn't mean that we're tied to AWS if for whatever reason they don't want to use it.
And that is an excellent segue to this very next item on work in progress. Thank you, Terry. Yeah, so we have this other work here, which is all of this stuff is potentially very related because they all have the potential of making some big improvements for all of our cartography work. And one discussion that we're having right now is how do we Dockerize it? As Terry mentioned, that it's possible to scale ourselves using Docker. And again, I think Nishil's, I think he was working on the spec for this. And if anybody has time, I would ask that take a look at the spec. It's not even, well, we don't really have the approaches written down yet, but I would ask that, any change to having an official Docker solution for cartography, that we send it through our entire community for review, and then we all work on it together, see what the pros and cons are. And I think what Terry was getting at also go with one thing to decide on Docker is what is the unit that we want to sync here, right? You can run multiple Docker containers in parallel, but what do you want to run in that? Do you want to run a subsync, or do you want to run an account? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I also will give you some feedbacks and like any bad stories, because currently I'm actually using Docker for cartography, and I'll give you some information, some insights later.
Cool. Yeah. think that because, yeah, like I said, having an official Docker container is a pretty significant change to core, since what we've been doing is just providing the software as is, and it's kind of, we've left it up to the implementer to decide how they want it best in their environment. By deciding on Docker, that's a pretty opinionated change. So yeah, let's talk about that first. And I think that this DAG work, this parallelism work in general, this probably deserves a spec also. So I'll get that out. And then again, there's this proof of concept PR here that I have kind of in prototyping. If you can take a look there also. It's work in progress, it's a draft. Yeah. Anything else on these topics before I open up the floor for issues and PRs to everybody else?
Yeah, I had a quick question. Like, do you know if someone actually did a full dive deep if Neptune database, like AWS Neptune database, can be used for cartography?
I actually don't know about Neptune. Does anybody else?
Yeah, I've looked at Neptune as a replacement for Neo4j when I first started at Lyft. Neptune was just not up to par at that point. Also, there's some challenges, not challenges, but there's some scenarios with Neptunes that are not available. So for example, the query language and the ease of use just weren't there. And Neptune is also not freely available. So Jupyter 1 is using Neptune quite aggressively, and then we've had some contact there. But generally, we've looked at Neptune before. We've elected to use Neo4j just because it's commonly available, and the query language and the UI just make things a lot easier. So I don't think there's a challenge in using the conversion. Might be possible, assuming Neptune supports CipherQL, which I don't believe they do
it
right
does
now.
not. Yeah, you'd have to. It would be an almost rewrite of cartography to move over to Gremlin, which Neptune supports.
Yeah, and would be a barrier for adoption, I think. Also, personal use case, if we can avoid lock-in from specific vendors, would be better.
Yeah, I need to talk to the Amundsen team here at Lyft. They also use Neo4j, and I think that they have some input also on I think like Gremlin and other ideas too. Gremlin also uses Cypher, does it or no?
No, it doesn't. For the Amundsen, we were talking a while ago because they were debating about Neptune and so on. The ease of use of Neo4j and the community edition was like the main reason they went forward. Neptune had historically has had pretty significant performance issue, which we can go back to the Jupyter 1 folks and see, what's the status there. But I remember, I think you were there, Alex, at RSA when we were kind of discussing. They were still having some, but their scale problem is much bigger than what most people are dealing with, but they're still having performance issue. On the Amundsen side, the community edition of Neo4j was like the main reason.
So, like, quick question: rather than talking about making a port of cartography to Neptune or to the Tinkerpop architecture, what's the capacity for doing integration between the two? I noticed that Neo4j is a provider to Tinkerpop, and that there's the accessibility there. So, if I were to wish to query cartography or to pull data in from cartography to that other database, has anybody thought about that link?
Of creating sort of a sync between the two in the backend? Yeah,
so one of the use cases that Max and I talked through over the weekend, or actually it might have been Monday, kind of as I'm thinking through the whole pivoting from the type of data that shows up in cartography to giving a graph-based view of like threat data or intel data as it affects a given host. So doing analysis on traffic or analysis on files, kind of the moving from landscape to specific. like being able to pivot from one into the other and using the landscape available through cartography to sort of link that data that I would be analyzing within Neptune, how to build that type of relationship, not being reliant upon cartography to do, you know, that large scale data analysis, but being able, buddy, please, being able to interlink those two platforms and kind of have a semi-seamless experience, given that they talk the same language.
Is it like something that I keep struggling? Graphistry. Is that what they're like? Sort of their business model is connecting all these things. Link Curious could do that as well, right?
So I can talk to Leo. I've got a personal connection with him and see, you know, exactly how he thinks about this same problem. I thought it was something that I just kind of broach here since we're on that topic.
Yeah, I don't think we've looked at that problem space. I think what you're trying to do is correlate disjoint data sets into one, right?
Yeah, that or provide a separate view, kind of like that. Hey, I'm interested in this specific host. Cartography is great at showing me the landscape analysis and the interlinking on the business side. Now let me pivot over to the threat analysis side, given this host, and correlate across the threat data. Kind of like you're taking the advantages of both sides, but not making a dependency on one or the other to do business in one space or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, these are. I don't think we've, from my knowledge, I don't think we've explored that.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing what other data sources you would correlate it with together with.
This is the whole basically, you know, threat hunting, threat intelligence capability, trying to leverage cartography data set, which is like, one is you have the landscape analysis and really good view there. And then how do you actually augment that view with threat intelligence and SIM, for example, or alerts?
Gotcha.
Something I'm happy to work on together.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure Alex would love to contribute as well.
Yeah, would love to learn more about that from you. Let's see. So are there any PRs or issues that anybody would like to bring up to the floor to talk about? Let me see if there's anything I would want to bring up. I know that we were having some trouble with different regions, and it looked like, Marco, it looked like that was kind of almost a token error, credential issue or something, rather than a region issue almost.
Yes, correct.
Were you able to figure that out, or?
It was going down a rabbit hole. Fixed Asia Pacific one was triggering in US West 2. And backstory, we have an account basically which uses almost every region for a specific use case. And that account is causing cartography to fail in different parts of the ingestion. Dynamo, S3, EC2. So that's how I'm trying to understand what's going on there.
Yeah, the thing that I need to do also is follow up on Richard's comment here. He had a suggestion about how we do like multiple unnecessary passes at S3, because S3 buckets are actually like global unique, right? You don't need to necessarily iterate through them for every single region. Yeah. Follow up on this. And I think that's the main one. Anything else that anybody wants to bring up?
What's moving cartography into the open source realm? Is there some tracking work item there? Meaning outside of the under the open source consortium?
We did present it at the CNCF maybe about a couple months ago. And from that point, we don't have any work items tracking moving into the CNCF quite yet, but that's definitely something that we're interested in.
Is there some sense of next step and roadmap to get there and timeline?
Not quite yet.
Do you need help for that?
Not yet. I think that we've got our friends at CNCF also, and under SIG security, and then they gave us good feedback when we presented, and then they gave us like a set of next steps to do to, move it forward under that umbrella.
Can you highlight some of the next step? I'm trying to see ballpark timeline. I'm curious on that move.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. I'll have to dig that up. Let me go bring somewhere in my email somewhere. List out CNCF.
And is that something LIF has to initiate, or is that something that the community can accelerate?
This is. I actually don't know the answer to that. Yeah, I think that. The issues of I don't know what parts are owned by Lyft versus everything else.
Yeah, there's no libraries per se that are owned by Lyft anymore. I mean, that's when we moved to open source, we ripped all of that out. So yeah, I had some question in terms of status on that. The next is we brought last topic about accelerating the deliftifying of Intel modules, the things that are sitting into the internal version of Lyft, in seeing how we could potentially accelerate moving them into the open source. Has there been any status and update on that?
Yeah, there's definitely plans to bring PagerDuty syncs into open source world and those other syncs that we have. Just been swamped, honestly.
But is the bottleneck the fact that it needs to be done by Lyft employee, or could that be distributed?
It could be distributed.
So what's the blocker to distribute those?
No, there's no blocker. It's just been hectic this past month.
Is there anything I can help, or other people can help to accelerate that?
If it's something that'll help you, yeah, I'll definitely loop you in and let you know.
Okay. Or if I need to reach out to Martin or sign some sort of NDA, I'm fine with that.
Yeah. When it comes to Amazon and contributing to cartography, I'm wondering, is us not being under CNCF a blocker? Because if it is, then that's a pretty strong case for us moving forward. If there's like a major contributor that is unable to make contributions, like for example, I didn't bring it up because, but Oracle, there's that Oracle PR from Siler, and then I guess we haven't heard back from them in a little bit. I think that there was some copyright thing. Yeah, we wanted them to get rid of the copyright Oracle.
Actually, you bring a good topic. I think we should follow up. Just to address your Amazon, we are allowed to contribute back to some capacity in terms of our personal capacity, which means that higher level is we can contribute back to cartography on our own personal time and device, for example. I think us making major contribution into the AWS stack is probably an area where I'm a little bit more sensitive. So I haven't fully, to answer your question, is we can contribute on our own personal time and device. As far as for example, me initiating a major contribution back with the help of Terry, Alex, Maxim, and Bernard, that's a whole different story, and I'm walking through kind of those steps. Most of the modules I think that we're building would be only useful internally, so we don't have an immediate plan to publish back, but we can if we want to. Major contribution in terms of scaling and so on is something I need to figure out with legal.
Okay.
Now on the question of the Oracle on the copyright, I am not a lawyer, so for me, I saw the copyright and kind of flagged it right away. Is like, I think we should have a conversation, maybe seek some guidance in terms of what is the implication of them adding the Oracle copyright to that.
Yeah.
To me, that was a red flag, but maybe it's not.
I wouldn't, like as it is, like if there is that on there, then I wouldn't merge it in.
But what's because this might be, as hypothetically, Amazon may come in with the same requirement, right? So like, what is the implication of it? And generally, how do we, I think we should have a deeper conversation in terms of like, what's the implication of having the copyright there?
Yeah.
And I've heard mixed stories on it.
Yeah, we'll have to wait for Silo to get back to us. They haven't replied to your comments yet.
What I'm assuming is that's a requirement. I think what he's communicated is that is a requirement for them to contribute back, right? So that's might be the constraint of reality. Now, do we accept these contribution with copyright? I don't know what is the overall impact. It seems minimal up to abysmal, but I don't know what is the long-term impact of having copyright from other corporation in there.
Yeah.
And it's not a unique case. I've looked at other open source projects, and
yeah,
there's some copyrights in there.
Like from mixed companies, though?
Yeah.
So tangentially related, there was a, we've all heard of Minecraft. There was a Minecraft build port that was, it enabled easy plugins for Minecraft servers. So you could have like really creative things going on inside of your Minecraft server. One of the key contributors, he signed his code, copyright me, whatever his name was. And one day there was a big fight, and he decided that because his code was copyrighted and it was his, he would say they're not allowed to use it anymore. And that project died, and it was like a huge project. So that's, I don't know if that's a risk that you guys have thought about, but I think that's a risk.
They have. So, for example, from an Intel module perspective, you can just hypothetically copyright it, and at some point you say you can't distribute it anymore, and you just yank that out, right? Alex, since Lyft is the owner and investor in this project, one approach I would do is seek the open source, seek legal advice internally at Lyft and see what is the impact there. And Matt Klein may probably have the right contact for that. That's an answer that Lyft can pay, right?
Yeah, this has definitely been a problem that's been solved before.
Yeah, it's just like, how do we, like, to me that was a red flag, but I've been reading on it. I'm not a lawyer, so anything law is like, there's different ways of interpreting it, and there's like repercussions, right? But if it's contained within an Intel module and that's all they own, and they can claim later on that, hey, we don't want you to distribute that, you just yank that out. But I think we need some legal advice, and that's something I think Lyft can afford to carry over. Basically, just answer that question for us.
Yeah, before we move forward on that, yeah, we definitely need to see Silo do a follow-up. I'll reach out.
Another small thing actually that would be helpful for us, even for other companies to contribute, if actually we will divide cartography actually in different packages. For example, we'll have a main package that actually runs cartography, but Intel module, analysis, and so on. It could be like different packages where like people can contribute, or even, for example, what Terry mentioned, like if we'll have this problem, we can just like take out one package. That's it.
Mm. So that's the legal advice I'm kind of seeking. I'm not against forking my own money to address those questions, but I think Lyft has like the resources to answer, and that might be just a simple email, Alex.
Oh yeah, for sure. All right. We're going to go move into open discussion, and then I'll go ahead and then turn off the record function for this meeting. Cool.